Hi everybody! I hope you're all having a good day. I hope you're all smiling and enjoying a lovely day. So in this following video, we're going to talk about the Unity render pipeline, and we're going to talk about why VTuber programs use the built-in render pipeline, especially the linear built-in render pipeline of Unity. And what the heck is HDRP, URP, and built-in? Like, why do they exist? So we'll talk about that. And also, is there a VTuber program that supports URP render pipeline for those who are interested? We'll talk about that too. So to start off, what is a render pipeline? A render pipeline is basically just, well, different like renderers that have different settings and use cases basically. So like, you know how Blender has Eevee and cycles basically? For Eevee, it is best if you want to go for like real-time rendering, the most optimized renderer. And also, like, if you don't want to go for like a super crazy accurate in terms of lighting and shadows, it will primarily be sort of best for that. I mean, again, cycles and Eevee can literally look like each other, but personally, in my case, Eevee is best for like real time, while Cycles is best if you want like the most crazy accuracy in terms of shadows and lighting, basically. So Cycles, I personally use it for realistic rendering, but for Eevee, I personally use it for like my toon shaders and such, basically. But again, both renderers can do both toon shading and realism. It's just a matter of like they both have like slightly different settings basically when it comes to the rendering. So it's just a matter of preference, really, basically. So it's kind of the same thing with Unity. Now, before I get into Unity a little bit, I do want to say you're probably going to have to do extra research regarding the pipeline preferences. I'll try my best to give you the base information though, but when it comes to the pipelines, they are heavily opinionated and heavily about preferences. It is a matter of your settings and so on, basically. So please do your research and do your own experimentation. And again, it could also keep in mind, try to think about like what type of style you're trying to go for in your rendering. Are you trying to go for realistic? Are you trying to go for a simple stylized? Are you trying to go for an anime toon or a westernized toon style? Are you trying to go for like that western anime realistic, semi-realistic shader sort of type of thing, or a mixture of multiple stuff? Like, what are you trying to do, basically? So there's different styles to keep in mind when depending on what you're trying to go for. But either way, when it comes to Unity, there are three different pipelines. We got HDRP, URP, and then we got built-in. So each of these three, they have their own use cases. Now, HDRP, which stands for High Definition Rendering Pipeline, is the best for the most realistic, whether for semi-realism or hyper-realism. Well, semi-realism as in it's like the higher end of realism, basically, is the best for realistic rendering. It uses the most specs, so it can be a bit more heavier, but it provides the best realistic looks in terms of lighting, shadows, and other settings, basically. So if you're trying to go for a realistic look, then I recommend HDRP. Now, that's pretty much all you really need to know. Most VTuber programs don't use HDRP because, again, it can cause a lot of optimization issues. So it's not really recommended for like VTuber program. I mean, unless you want to make a VTuber program dedicated to realism, then be my guest. But otherwise, most VTuber programs, they'd rather use something a bit more optimized, which I'll get into. Now, this one's a little bit more challenging to explain, and it's between URP and built-in. So URP stands for Universal Rendering Pipeline, and then built-in is just the legacy render. It's basically the built-in is basically just the render pipeline that you see the moment you open up Unity. You're looking at the built-in legacy render right there. Now, the thing about URP and built-in is that they're way too close to each other. They have some differences, but they're like really close, because technically URP is basically the updated version of built-in. That's why they look pretty close. Like they're kind of close to each other. They have a little bit of differences, but they're like close yet different. So it's really tricky to really say like which is better. So URP, if I were to say, at least according to what I'm trying to get info on, this is a little tricky to explain. But URP has like some extra settings that may be good depending on what you're going for. So if you want to go for like some extra realism in your setup, for instance, or a little bit more accuracy on what you're trying to go for, let's say like shadows, for instance, then URP would probably be the best for that, or reflections even. Just an example. But again, the thing is that built-in and URP, they can literally replicate each other if you know what you're doing. But otherwise, though, depending on the style that you're going for with your rendering, there may be some stuff that built-in may not replicate, but URP can do it. It's kind of like, it's just a matter of settings, really. URP has extra settings, but there may be some settings that are missing that isn't in built-in, basically. So it's a matter of preference. You're gonna have to like play around with the settings, really. Now, examples of URP when it comes to the best toon, a best example shader I would recommend would be Nilotoon URP. Now I don't know about realistic rendering, like realistic URP shaders. You could probably look that up in the Unity Asset Store. But Nilotoon, if you're going for a toon shader in URP, Nilotoon would probably be the best. But that thing's like $12,000 because it's a company-based toon shader. It's supposed to be like an industry-based toon shader, basically. It can be used by individuals. You'll have to email them and get like a price quota, but otherwise it's probably like more than $1,000 for that toon shader. So keep that in mind. That's just Nilotoon. Because you also gotta like get the setup for it and then have someone else set it up for you and so on and so on. It could be a headache. So there's that. It's primarily best if you want to go for like that enchanting soft toon shader look, basically. Like if you don't want to go like hard cell toon shade like me, like I have the cell, like a hard cell shaded look on my character. If you want to go for something like softer or like more like enchanting looking, I guess, Nilotoon would probably be the best for that. There's also other URP shaders like Mtoon and Liltoon. Well, for Mtoon, VRM devs are still working on that, but otherwise they do exist though, basically. So there's those examples, and there's other URP toon shaders as well, or other shaders that you can get in the asset store or on GitHub or something like that. But otherwise, though, those are the best examples I can probably point to, or at least on top of my memory. Built in, there's a lot of other shaders that are supported for built-in. So let's say Poyomi is a popular example. Basically, whatever VR chess shader you can think of, they're definitely mostly for the built-in pipeline. There's like some crystal shaders, like little diamond shaders that you can get, and it works on built-in only. There is also Liltoon. There's a built-in version for it. There's ArcToon. There's the Unity Chan Toon Share. I don't know if they have. I think they have a URP version of it, but I don't remember. I think they do, because it is made by the Unity peeps themselves. So I'm pretty sure there's a URP one. I don't know, but basically, it's like most of the toon shares or realistic share, whatever the heck shader. I keep referring to toon because a lot of people tend to use toon shaders, but depending on the shader you want to go for, there's a huge majority of them are probably going to be used for the built-in render pipeline rather than URP. There are some that have translated their toon shaders or shaders overall over to URP, but again, not all of them do that. So that's the thing to just keep in mind. Most shaders are support in built-in more than URP, but again, there's some translation, but again, it's just a matter of preference, basically. So yeah, and also keep in mind also this is something it's like a little info. From what I've heard, built-in is probably best for the highest optimization. URP uses a little more, but not a crazy ton, not like HDRP. But URP just uses a little more specs, but otherwise they're perfectly fine. But hopefully that information kind of gives you a bit of insight on European built-in. Again, it's a little tricky to explain them because they're really close to each other, yet have slight differences, but otherwise it's just a matter of preference really on what you're trying to achieve, really. Otherwise they can replicate each other for the most part. So yeah, to a certain degree. But either way though, now the question is, why do VTuber programs use the built-in render pipeline, and why specifically the linear setting? So basically, when it comes to the built-in render pipeline, first of all, the VRM dev recommends to use the built-in pipeline with linear because, you know, for most users probably may not know how to like utilize URP shading, because again, not every shader is made for URP. Most shaders are primarily made for built-in. So, and you know, with VRM, they recommend the built-in render pipeline with linear. We used to use Gamma, actually, back with Void, when Void started for the first time. Like, actually, if you use Void Beta, that's Gamma. That's built-in with Gamma right there. But eventually, we pretty much swapped over to linear, especially, like, VC Face swapped over to the linear rendering because it was more accurate in terms of color and shadows, so that's why we use the built-in render pipeline, but with the linear setting, basically. So, yeah. But otherwise, though, most VTuber programs, they just use built-in, not only because the VRM devs recommend it, but also when they're using asset bundle models, it's in terms of, like, again, like I mentioned about, like, VR chat shaders and most shaders being supported for built-in, yeah, that's why. Just to keep it easy on their users, especially for new users, because remember, not every 3D VTuber is a nerd at 3D. Not every... In fact, there's probably a lot of them that rather keep their setup as simple as possible, so keep that in mind. So it's honestly just easier on the user end to use built-in rather than URP, because then they have to switch it up, and then if they have to use if they want to use like something very specific, then it may be a little trickier to like have the shader translate for URP than to like yeah, you see what I mean. It can get a little confusing, basically. So it's better to just use whatever is default with Unity, just to make it easier, especially for beginners. Now, again, you can have your preference, like, oh, URP should be easy for beginners as well. But again, like I said, from what I'm assuming, is because of that. So shaders mostly being supported and built in, VRM does recommend it, and the fact that it's easier on new 3D users to use built-in just to avoid confusion, basically. So yeah. So that's pretty much at least a couple reasons why VTuber programs tend to use built-in. Again, it is a matter of preference, but also as well, even Void Studio, Void Studio and from what I heard VR Chat, they both use the built-in render pipeline. So it's honestly just keeping it consistent, basically. Pretty much is all I can say. Keeping up the consistency and not causing any confusion, especially to new 3 users. So yeah. So hopefully that kind of explains. I tried my best. It's a bit gibberish, but oh well. Now, overall though, to summarize everything I pretty much just said, before we get into the last question of if there is a VTuber program with URP, which there is one, HDRP is best for realistic rendering, while URP is nice for some slight realism or some extra settings, but it can use a little bit of specs, but not a lot. HDRP is the one that uses a lot. If you're especially going for a very, very specific look in your render, you may want to use URP. Otherwise, though, you can still replicate what you do with URP to built-in to a certain extent. Like, if you want something like Nilo Toon, that's only done with URP. Well, to a certain extent. If you're talking about the lighting that Nilo Toon has, yeah, that is probably something URP can only do. But if you're talking about like the base toon share, like what I have here, like I just have a toon share going on, you could just use Lil Toon in the built-in render pipeline. That's perfectly fine. Don't overcomplicate a toon shader. And basically, URP and the built-in pipeline, they can be used for toon, they can be used for realism. It's just a matter of what settings do you prefer, what are you trying to achieve in your things. You're gonna have to do some self-experimenting and even extra research too. So yeah. Now, my personal opinion, if I were to say, personally, if you want to go for a toon shader look, it depends on the toon shader, but if you want to keep a simple toon shader, just stay with the built-in pipeline. It is already enough. You don't have to overcomplicate the toon shader. If you feel like your shadows look awful or something like that, do normal editing, use AO maps, and use stencil meshes. That can definitely help achieve like that really nice toon shader look. Otherwise, if you really want to have like that real-time shadows, I mean, also, there's also contact shadows as well. Someone brought up that that sort of thing. VNyan has support for contact shadows, so if you want to have it where it's like absolutely done via shader, then you could just use VNyan, for instance, and their contact shadow support to have like that perfect shadow look, basically, and there you go. You got really good shadows in the built-in pipeline. Otherwise, though, if you really want to go for like a toon shader that has like extra fanciness, like the soft cell toon shading look like Nilotoon has or something like that, or there's like a very specific shine you want with your toon shader, like you want to go for like that semi-realistic, like a slight touch of realism to a certain extent, but it's still like a toon shader mixed with it, like a mixture, like a stylized realistic or something like that, or just realistic in general. URP would probably be best for that sort of case. Again, depends on the settings you want to go for. HDRP, we know, best for hyper realistic or most realistic settings, basically. So yeah, that's how I would probably put into my preference. I personally prefer to use built-in just to keep things simple, not to overcomplicate my toon setup, and yeah, because I just use a little toon, or I just use my friend's toon shader. That's about it, pretty much. So yeah, and again, like I said, they can all do toon HDRP. You could do a toon share if you want with it. Like they can all do toon, they can all do realism. It's just a matter of what you want to do with it, basically. So yeah, but either way, hope what I just said before summarizes what the heck are these render pipelines for, and sort of explain to you the sort of use cases for it. And why do VTuber programs use the built-in pipeline? It's because it's easier on users, VRM Dev recommends it, and it's just most shaders accessible, like the VRChat shaders, they're made for built-in. So keep it simple and also consistent, because, you know, most of the VTuber related programs, they all pretty much use built-in already, just to keep it consistent and simple. So, yeah. Anyways, though, now last but not least, is there a VTuber program that has URP support? Warudo Pro. You have to pay for it. You gotta pay for it. The only way you can get it is you have to email Tiger. I'll leave the info in the description below. I'll even leave like some links if you want to do some extra research on HDRP, URP, and such. But again, I recommend heavily Google. But if you really want to use URP, like you are strong about wanting to use URP in your setup, then use Warudo Pro. Now, I will also say this as well. I'll answer this question too. Can VTuber programs make a toggle to change render pipelines in their software? No, they can't. So just like Blender, where you can't have a keyframe to toggle between Eevee and cycles, basically, the same things with Unity. Now, if you're a master coder and you know how to do some crazy coding and such, you could make that thing. You could, if you know what you're doing. Otherwise, though, for the most part, it's pretty difficult. Again, if you're a master coder, you probably know how to do it, but most people may not know how to do that. So to keep it simple, we don't do the toggling with the render pipeline. It can be really tricky. Plus, also you have to translate the shaders to each render pipeline, and they don't 100% translate into each other. Like URP and built-in, they can kind of translate into each other, because again, URP is the updated version of built-in. There are some differences though to keep in mind of though, but otherwise though, to a certain extent they could translate into each other, but it can cause issues with compatibility, basically. So it can be a real big headache, basically. Now, besides compatibility being a bit of an issue when it comes to changing different pipelines, when it comes to materials and such, there's also the question of why can't developers just export, like let's say VNyan exports a URP and an HDRP version and then a built-in pipeline version, or why can't VCFace do the same thing, or like other programs, why can't they do that? If the program is constantly updating, like a lot, like VNyan is constantly updating a lot, I don't think it's gonna be like really good, because again, keep in mind, like I mentioned about the compatibility with the pipelines can be a little iffy. Having to always update, technically, like updating the program and then exporting 3 different versions and then doing debugging for like, let's pretty much 3 different programs, it's like, that's a headache. If anything, I would recommend, if a developer has to like export like 3 different versions, you know, HDRP, URP, and then built-in pipeline for their VTuber program, only do it if the VTuber program is either A, no longer getting updated, or B, it's not gonna have an update for a very, very long time. So yeah, that's at best I would recommend it. But otherwise though, there is the program Warudo. Warudo actually has URP support. That one, only the pro version, you have to pay for that. So, yeah. That's the only way you can get a pre-existing VTuber program with URP. It's only with Warudo Pro, pretty much. And there's also some other extra stuff with Warudo Pro, but otherwise they're mainly for like corporate use or industry use, basically. Like if you're if you're working for hire, Warudo Pro would be best. Or if you just want some extras, basically, there's that too. So yeah. But either way, though, not all VTuber programs are going to export different versions. Some may do it, like Warudo, they have like a separate version for a different pipeline, but otherwise, not all of them are going to do that. But yeah, but either way, though, I hope that this video at least explains to you guys the whole thing about HDRP, URP, and then built-in. At least as best as I can explain it. It's really tricky to explain it, but hopefully it helps you out understand why VTuber programs use built-in, and that that the only URP VTuber program in existence, at least a pre-existing VTuber program, is Warudo Pro. And also the fact, like, not every VTuber program gonna have like separate version of the render pipeline and so on. And then, pretty much, that basically. Again, please do your research, like extra research on the pipeline that you prefer, and it's just a matter of your preference, really. But otherwise, if by any chance, let's say you really want to use HDRP or you want to use URP in a very, very specific way, I would personally recommend, if you have to, if you really, really need to, please make your own VTuber program. It's not really, if you know how to code, if you know your way with coding, like C# and you know, like for instance, how to set up iFacial mocap on Unity, which that's the thing, or Rococo, or your mocap suit basically. You know how to set up your VTuber model and do some retargeting stuff, set up your tracking, and do all your coding stuff basically. If you know how to do that, then you can make your own VTuber program. Otherwise, if you don't know how to do all that other stuff, then it would be recommended to use the pre-existing VTuber programs basically. So yeah, or if you really want the most hyper-realistic rendering, you can use Unreal Engine. Or if you want an alternative to Unity, there's Godot. But either way, I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey, goodbye, bye everyone. I hope to see you guys next time, okay? Bye-bye! Thank you so much to all my Snowflake members. In case you don't know, I have YouTube membership, so if you want to get access to extra perks and further support me in what I do, then feel free to join the Snowflake memberships. Otherwise though, just you guys watching is just enough support for me, and I appreciate every ounce of it. So, either way though, I hope you guys have a lovely day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye!